Hello, and welcome to our conversation today. I hope it will be a truly fruitful and interesting experience for you all. Before I forget, I ask you to like, comment, share, and help us spread the word about our work. Don't forget, during this quarantine, New Acropolis has been working tirelessly to be present in the lives of Brazilians so that we can help everyone get through this challenging time. But, as a volunteer institution without resources, your support is essential for our content to reach more people. So, please don't forget, help us share our work, all right? Today, then, we will work with a different challenge. We will talk about mysticism in St. John of the Cross, known as the Poet of God, a magnificent poet with a truly beautiful message, and today we will at least share a glimpse of his poetry. We will have that today. As everyone knows, I am a great admirer of mystical poetry. I have already spoken to you about my beloved Kabir, about Rumi, about Tagore. In general, these are the finest expressions, or at least the most well-known, of Eastern mystical poetry that we have. But we know, or have spoken little so far, about Christian mystical poetry. I have already had the opportunity to speak to you about a Christian writer, whom I greatly admire, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, though he is not a mystical poet. To go further, I also have many preferences within Christianity. Philosophy conducts a comparative study, learning from all traditions. I have spoken about Teilhard de Chardin, perhaps one day, who knows, about John Bunyan, perhaps one day, about Thomas à Kempis, or about Teresa of Avila, who is so closely connected to our subject today. They are all wonderful and truly deserve to be known. Well, this courageous young man who became a landmark, a reference in mystical poetry of Christian inspiration, is a Spaniard who lived in the 16th century. The mysticism of St. John of the Cross emerged at a particularly complex moment, which was the time of the Counter-Reformation. So, you will see that on one side there was the recent rise of Protestantism, and on the other, within the Church itself, there were disputes and dissensions. He himself was greatly persecuted in his work. And we also have the Inquisition operating at full force. Amid so many dualities, so many disputes, it is remarkable how a man like St. John of the Cross positions himself. He simply does not adopt any of the polarities. He makes an extremely important and original choice. In the midst of all the disputes, he chooses to turn inward and upward. It is no wonder that he was a man endowed with such wisdom, because always, in the midst of all disputes, throughout all historical times, the best way out is inward and upward. And perhaps, I dare say, it is not only the best way out, but the only one. So, we will learn about a young man who, in the midst of all this, is able to position himself in the wisest way, without taking any radical stance. He is able to take the wisest position. So, John of the Cross was a young Spaniard, as I mentioned to you, who lived in Spain in the 16th century, to be more precise, from 1542 to 1591. In other words, only 49 years. Although we must consider that this only is quite contemporary, because for a historical period like that, 49 years was actually a rather long life. Life expectancy was much shorter than it is today. Life expectancy was much lower than what we have in our days. So, he lived for 49 years and was born in a village that, interestingly, in his time was even a bit larger than it is today. Fontaveros, which is in Castile, was at that time a village of a little over 1,000 people. Today, it seems to have just over 900, meaning it remains very small. In this Fontaveros, there lived a peasant woman, his mother, who at a certain point caught the affection of a young silk merchant from a wealthy family, and thus began the union between the parents of John of the Cross, who had two brothers and was the youngest among them. He was the youngest in the family. Well, before we delve further into the details of the life of John of the Cross, it is important to remember that the work for which he is most remembered, beyond his poetic contributions, is his role in the founding of the Order of Discalced Carmelites, together with Teresa of Avila, another remarkable figure whom I have already discussed in a lecture about women in philosophy. At that time, Teresa of Avila was 52 years old, and he was 25. When he was already considering joining the Carthusians, which was a more austere and rigorous order, she invited him to help found a reformed branch of the Carmelites, known as the Discalced Carmelites. They would lead a much simpler life, focused on the essential purpose of the order, which was the ascent of Mount Carmel, symbolically speaking. The ascent of human consciousness to the highest, as close as possible to God. And she, who had already founded several convents, she was a pilgrim of God, had established some small convents, gatherings of 13 or 15 people, all of them female, of course, which was what she, as a woman, was able to do, invited him to abandon his plans with the Carthusians and join her in creating the male branch of the Discalced Carmelites. He accepts, abandons all his former ambitions, and begins to work with her on this project. Today, it is said that the poetry of John of the Cross represents the pinnacle of universal Christian mystical literature. And, without a doubt, it stands among the finest works in Spanish poetry, whether mystical in nature or not. He is a significant name due to his talent in expressing his mysticism. Through poetry that is profound, a dialogue of the soul with God, and which is deeply centered on the aspect of renunciation, of surrender to the divine. He was canonized in 1726 by Pope Benedict XIII. Now, returning a bit to his life, his original name was Juan de Yepes y Alvarez, and he came from a family of conversos, that is, people who had converted to Christianity. Of origin, perhaps Jewish, perhaps Muslim, it is not possible to say this with great precision. His parents, then, Gonzalo and Catalina, marry, and his father is disinherited by the family, which was a wealthy family, a family of means. They face many financial difficulties, but these hardships grow even greater when his father dies. John of the Cross seems to have been only 7 years old at that time. His mother goes through a terrible situation. It is even said that his older brother is believed to have died of starvation, of malnutrition, because she was unable to provide food for her family. She goes from one place to another, seeking work, searching for a way to survive. Until she manages to settle down, many hardships are endured. She seeks help from the father's family, who refuse to help her in any way. And so, there were very difficult moments. From a very young age, the boy learns a variety of trades in an effort to find a profession. His first experience with school was at an orphanage, where he attended and became literate, receiving his first lessons. Afterwards, he spends 4 years at the Jesuit college, where his religious talent is already recognized. He then attends the highly prestigious University of Salamanca, studying theology and philosophy. He remains there for another 4 years. In 1563, he joins the Carmelites and is ordained a priest in 1567. He begins and dedicates himself wholeheartedly, together with Teresa of Avila, to the establishment of male monasteries, the Discalced Carmelites, the male friars, while Teresa continues her work with the women. It is said that because he was very small, very short, Teresa of Avila had the habit of calling him my little Seneca. Not only because he was small, but also because he was a first-rate intellectual, a constant scholar. Although he was a man endowed with great humility, he possessed profound knowledge. He was a devourer of libraries and had an insatiable curiosity for knowledge. He delighted in having more and more ideas that could deepen his vision. To broaden his vision, and to enable him to ascend more swiftly and efficiently on this symbolic climb of Mount Carmel, thus paving the way for those who would come after him. It is curious to note how he became, considering that. We can probably consider that Teresa of Avila was his inspiration, his first teacher. But because she was a woman, he, much younger, became her confessor. And this is a very beautiful story, because Teresa was a figure who embodied humility. At no point did she feel diminished by this. On the contrary, quite the opposite. In fact, it is said that John of the Cross possessed a serenity, a gentleness. It was difficult for anyone to become upset with him, although, in contrast, Teresa of Avila's work did indeed provoke many who were upset. There is mention of a vision he had between 1574 and 1577, in which he saw Jesus Christ crucified, viewed from above. A rather interesting perspective. The world at his feet and he crucified, and St. John's view was from above. As if he were seeing the mission of that being in the world. And this scene was painted, of course, some centuries later by Salvador Dali. It is called Christ of St. John of the Cross. It is a very beautiful image. I encourage you to become familiar with it. Just as the mystical vision of Teresa of Avila was also depicted in a sculpture by Bernini. Also very beautiful, when an angel sets her heart ablaze with arrows of fire. They were two mystics with something, with that which the great mystics possess: vision, intuition, perception, metaphysics. Both had their own visions and were very special beings. Well, a tragic fact of his life was this dispute, which had not yet been resolved. The Carmelite order, between the traditional Carmelites and the Discalced Carmelites, led to some very radical attitudes and actions on the part of the Carmelites. On one occasion, in 1577, John of the Cross was imprisoned, taken to Toledo, and there he remained in a cell marked by acts of cruelty. It is said that conditions were extremely harsh and he was severely punished. He spent 9 months in this situation, during which he managed to obtain paper from a compassionate jailer and wrote extensively. Many of his poems, his beautiful and inspired verses, were composed during this time. During these 9 months of imprisonment, it is said that after this period he managed to remove the hinges from the door of his cell, and he escaped through a hole that existed in the wall of a neighboring cell. While he was there, in order to read, to be able to engage in his studies, he had to climb onto a bench so that, through the small window, he could receive light from that adjacent cell. In other words, he was plunged into a cramped cell, without light, living in the most precarious conditions one could possibly imagine. But after 9 months, he escapes, manages to return to the embrace of his fellow Carmelites, where he is treated and cared for, arriving in very poor health, and resumes his path without further discussion of the matter. He succeeds, after a few years, in having the Pope grant the separation and independence of the Carmelite order, Discalced branch. This brings an end to all the controversy and dispute. Well, the spiritual canticle, above all, is a work he writes largely during this period of imprisonment. These are his two most well-known poetic works, the Spiritual Canticle, which is a version of the biblical Song of Songs. Imagine living in a circumstance where the Bible could not be translated, and therefore, in order to have the Bible in Castilian, you had to create a version of it. Literally, it was forbidden, it simply could not be done. So, he creates a version of the Song of Songs in poetry, which is precisely his spiritual canticle. And The Dark Night of the Soul, which is my favorite work, is very beautiful. It speaks about this journey of the human soul toward God, passing through the night of the ages, through times of crisis, times of obscurity, both outside and within the person himself. And it is truly magnificent. We will share some verses at the end. In fact, this talk is above all to present some of these verses, to give you a taste of the mysticism of St. John of the Cross, and, who knows, perhaps you will become interested in his work. And it is said that much of his work also consisted of writing commentaries on these two poems. He had a few other short poems, in addition to these two great works, and much of what he wrote were commentaries, because the works are highly symbolic. He explained them in lectures and also clarified them in writing. Well, as I have already mentioned to you, The Dark Night takes the night as its favorite stage. The night represents ignorance and the diversity of the night of the ages, and how to prevail over diversity. Therefore, it is a very interesting work for times of crisis. Both individual crises and global crises, such as the one we are experiencing at this moment. How to ensure that the soul continues to walk toward God, toward its mystical union with its divine spouse, even in the midst of the night of the ages. Well, fundamentally, there are some ideas that we could say are the most recurring in the work of John of the Cross. First of all, as I mentioned to you earlier, it is the detachment from any attachment, any desire, any anchor that binds the human soul to the earth. In other words, that human consciousness should detach itself from everything, all the illusory ties of the earth, and achieve a pure surrender to the divine. One should wish to serve as a channel so that the divine may shine in the world through them. Therefore, anchors of desires or attachments must be overcome. Another key point is the pursuit of knowledge, which is not driven by curiosity or personal interest, but above all, by the thirst for God. The thirst for God compels us to seek to enlighten our reason and awaken our soul, so that we may more swiftly fulfill this necessity. Journey. That is why he was so deeply interested in knowledge. But it was a very focused kind of knowledge. He understood that through knowledge, he held a fundamental question, a fundamental path, a chosen direction. He wished to reach unity, to return to the Father's house. Thus, every pursuit of knowledge had a reason, had a destination. And, once again, reiterating what I have shared with you, it was an extremely difficult era for someone to engage in such profound mysticism. The external conflicts were very alluring and attention-grabbing. The polarizations were highly attractive. And for a man, at that moment, to refuse the external and instead dive within himself, he had to possess a very well-established and deeply rooted identity. Only a man with a very profound sense of life, who already has a glimpse of the presence of God in his life, in his consciousness, can choose to abandon such a complex era and turn inward. And he managed to do this throughout his entire life, his short, yet very fruitful, life. It is not without justice that he is called the poet of God. And now I will bring to you what is truly the subject of this lecture. After this introduction, I would like to share some excerpts from poems. These were translated into Portuguese by Friar Patricio Chardin. And, of course, due to the length of a lecture, I will not discuss entire poems, but rather selected passages. Although some excerpts are longer and others shorter, no poem will be addressed in its entirety. These are just a few details I would like to highlight to show you the caliber of man we are dealing with here. Mysticism is a kind of inspiration that enables a person to fulfill themselves as a channel, as a digit of God, allowing this sacred message to be conveyed to the world without contamination. Thus, the closest we can come to hearing the divine voice is through those individuals who have diligently purified themselves, with every effort, to become a clean, unobstructed channel, so that this breath would reach the world as breath and not as dust, so that this light would reach the world as light and not as shadow. A life of purity, a life of self-control, a life of constant elevation. And that is why they became vid channels. A great mystical poet is, fundamentally, an excellent channel. This demands from the human being a tremendous effort to annul anything that is particular, selfish, or reductive. Our habit is to do the opposite. We dedicate all our energies, which are not even truly ours, but rather a gift from nature, a gift from life, to manifest only our personal, particular, selfish, and untranscendent experience, which, in the vast majority of cases, dies with us. So, in a certain way, a great mystic poet eternalizes their life through what passed through them, which was of an eternal nature. So, shall we continue? Let us then, first of all, get to know songs of the soul. I have brought you a very small excerpt. And what draws my attention in this poem is precisely this mystical and revealing focus on the heart of things. To find your own heart, your essence, as a channel of the divine, allows you to have an illuminating focus that will enable you to see the essence of things, the essence of people, the essence of life, its essential idea. On one occasion, I had a dream, which I obviously will not describe here, but in that dream I saw a person, and I realized that this person, in their entirety, their manifestation stemmed from an idea, and in that moment I was able to understand the idea behind that person. It was very curious, because when I woke up, I thought to myself, with the concrete reasoning of daily life, I would not have been able to reach that synthesis. According to Eastern tradition, synthesis is what human beings possess that is most elevated. It is an attribute of the will, an attribute of what is still called the soul. It is the noblest quality that humans possess, this ability to grasp the heart of things, which is their synthesis. And it seems that mystical individuals do not require a dreamlike consciousness for this. They look at things and see their essence while awake, fully conscious. They are capable of this synthesis because they see through their own hearts. And depth always generates profundity, whereas superficiality always leads to relationships that merely touch the surface. So, let us proceed to this brief passage from Songs of the Soul. On a night so blessed, and in a secret where no one saw me, nor did I look upon anything without another light, nor guide, except for that which burned within my heart. I repeat, listen to this final part. Nor did I look upon anything without another light, nor guide, except for that which burned within my heart. It is the deepest way to see into the heart of things, through a light that emanates from your own heart, a light that is not bound by superficialities, nor by fleeting things. It perceives that which is eternal behind all beings. It is able to see this essential idea, this center from which all beings present in manifestation radiate. Whereas the ordinary person sees only the outer shell. Eternal Source. This poem of his is quite interesting, and I have brought a considerable number of verses from it because it is one of my favorites. I truly appreciate it, because it speaks of a source for manifestation. And from this single source, even the waters of duality emanate, heavens and hells, good and evil, as if all things in the universe were reduced to a single unity. This is not always seen by other exponents of religion. Sometimes they reduce their vision to an eternal duality between good and evil. St. John went beyond that. He spoke of a single source, one, true, and absolute, from which all the rivers of manifestation draw their waters, including that which is called heavens and hells, good and evil. In the end, if evil is the obstacle that, once overcome, allows beings to grow, in the end, everything is endowed with meaning. Everything contributes so that the universe moves forward and beings elevate their consciousness back home. So, see how beautiful this passage from the eternal source is. That eternal source is hidden, but I know well where it has its dwelling, even at night. Its origin I do not know, for it has none, but I know that all origin comes from it, even at night. I know that nothing can be so beautiful, and the heavens and the earth drink from it, even at night. Its radiance is never dimmed, and I know that all light is born from it, even at night. I know its currents are abundant, and that heavens and hells are nourished and moved by them, even at night. That eternal fountain is hidden within this living bread to give us life, even at night. In other words, even in the night of time, this fountain does not cease. And what must be done is to find it, behind appearances, no matter how dark they may seem. Behind it all is a single, unique, living fountain. Behind multiplicity, behind duality, it is unity that calls all children back home. Peaceful Night. This peaceful night is a poem I admire. I have brought you a small excerpt, especially regarding the illumination or verticalization of knowledge into wisdom. In other words, he speaks of the moment when knowledge ceases to be a horizontal accumulation, when knowledge becomes a springboard for the human being to acquire vertical knowledge, which is the knowledge called wisdom, transformative, illuminating. It is capable of focusing in a way that penetrates its own heart and the heart of all things. I often mention in my lectures that if we take a sequence of scientists throughout history and work only with the tool of mental logic, you will see that a combinatorial analysis of Galileo's thought, drawing out all possible consequences, does not contain the thought of Isaac Newton within it. In other words, Isaac Newton's thought does not come only from a rational deduction of what existed before. Something new fell into his mind, besides that apple. An inspiration, an intuition, something that is more than merely a rational elaboration of what already existed. And if you take someone further ahead, like Albert Einstein himself, and perform a combinatorial analysis of Newton's thought, drawing all possible conclusions from those premises, you will not extract Einstein's thought from within Newton's thought. It is not simply a logical deduction from what already existed. Something new emerged there, something that did not come from what was already present. A renewing element appeared there, something intuitive, something perceived, something that breaks the logic that existed until then. Therefore, you realize that this inventiveness, this perception, renews the world in all areas. And not only in the realm of a Christian mystic. This capacity, at a certain moment, to pause for a moment from listening to the voices of the world, and to listen to your own voice, the voice of silence, and to see what it brings to you, something that does not belong to what was already there, something new, yearning to be born, and that is born through you. You serve as a bridge, a pontiff. So, he will speak a little about this transformation of knowledge into wisdom. Peaceful night. Just as the break of dawn dispels the darkness of night and reveals the light of day, so too is the spirit, calm and quiet in God, led from the darkness of natural knowledge to the morning light of the supernatural knowledge of God Himself. In other words, there is a passage, a turning point, where we move beyond mere horizontality, beyond the accumulation of knowledge. Because it does not make us wise, it makes us accumulators. And we make this return and deepen this knowledge within ourselves and in the world. And then we are able to add value to the world, which is one of the fundamental conditions of human existence and a great human mission. Something new descends upon the earth because a person possessed the necessary purity to be incarnate. The necessary love, dedication, commitment, and purity. Messenger and Message. It is a poem that I find supremely courageous, a poem I consider supremely brave. Notice, this is a man living in the time of the height of the Inquisition, an era in which intermediaries between man and God were considered absolutely necessary. And messenger and message is as if it were a direct relationship with God, saying, do away with the intermediaries. Be yourself the messenger. This is very courageous. And what is told about John of the Cross is that he was a very gentle and serene man, incapable of provocations or acts of rebellion. So, I created for him a concept, which is that of serene rebellion. Because this is a concept, this is a poem that is, let us say, very iconoclastic, a bold poem, coming from a man who was pure serenity and peace. I am amazed that I managed to say things like this in such a complicated moment. Perhaps things like this would still cause some controversy even today. See how interesting, how beautiful this is. Do not wish to send me any more messengers, for they do not know how to tell me what I desire. Just returning to the beginning, he is speaking with God. Take a good look. Do not wish to send me any more messengers, for they do not know how to tell me what I desire. Do not wish, from now on, that I should know you only through the measure of these messengers of news and feelings, who bring me word of you so distant and so removed from the longing my soul has for you. I ask you, therefore, that from this day forward you no longer send me these distant tidings. If until now I could make do with them, because I neither knew you nor loved you much, now the greatness of the love within me can no longer be satisfied with these messages. Nothing, whether of earth or of heaven, can get the soul the news it longs to have of you. Therefore, in place of these messengers, be yourself both the messenger and the message. Beyond all else, it is not only a courage before men, but a courage before God. Come, for my heart can hold you, my heart yearns for you. But further on, he himself will say, it is a flame that could reduce the universe to dust, yet the human heart can endure it. Why is that? Because it is of the same nature as the flame, and therefore it is capable of withstanding it, of being illuminated, and of transforming itself into something far greater. Only the human heart can withstand the flame of the divine essence. Its power would be capable of undermining the universe from end to end. Living Flame of Love. I have also brought a short excerpt, just to show you the tone of this poem, which is also very philosophical and very beautiful. How to refine our taste, how to elevate the vibration of our soul, of our consciousness, is fundamental for those who wish to be a messenger of God, for those who wish to be a channel. Your word is a burning flame. These words are spirit and they are life. Only souls that have ears to hear them can perceive them. Those who do not have a healthy taste and prefer other things cannot savor the spirit and the life that are contained in such words. Instead, they find only insipidity. How curious, isn't it? Evolution is nothing more than the refinement of taste. As a great philosopher of the last century, Gibran, once said, in other words, only those who have refined their taste, who have elevated their vibration, who have elevated their consciousness, are capable of hearing this message and resonating with it. For the Egyptian tradition, the principle of vibration, it is said that wherever our consciousness vibrates, it identifies itself, and this is the inner name of man. In other words, where do we vibrate? Are we capable of resonating with things of this level? Yes. Well, that is you. That is why Plato was so concerned with the music given to the people, because he said that music is a summons. Consonance, that is, music that vibrates at a very low level, or texts, or conversations, whatever it may be, pulls our consciousness downward. Consciousness resists greatly when it comes to regressing from what it has already achieved, but if there is persistent insistence, it can happen when, in fact, the meaning of life would be to do the opposite. To refine our taste more and more, so that the only voice that satisfies our ears, the only message, is a mystical message that passes through the world without crossing any shadow, any dust, as pure as possible. This is the utmost refinement of taste, a mystical vision of the universe. The song of life spoken of in the light on the path. Refine your ears to hear the song of life. A hidden treasure. I have brought only a small excerpt from this poem. It speaks of inner life. If we feel the need to turn inward, to find our identity, our mission, and to know what material we must work on, which edges we must polish, to take up the reins of building ourselves. And this small excerpt speaks a little about that. If the one whom my soul loves is within me, why can I neither find nor feel him? The reason is that he is. Tibbin. And you must also hide yourself in order to find and feel him. Do you see? If there is something divine in our essence, because our essence is part of the divine essence of the universe, if this divine essence is already within us, then why do I not find it? Why do I not see it? It is hidden within us. Therefore, our consciousness must also hide itself in order to find it. Step away for a moment from the commotion, from the noise of the external world. Be capable of delving deeply within yourself so that, at a certain moment, you may experience this mystical encounter, which is symbolically represented by Michelangelo in the creation of Adam. This encounter of this divine essence with our consciousness, which awakens and takes possession of our lives, when we recognize it as our center, our direction, our true identity. So often we speak of inner life, and sometimes, in a poem like this one, it becomes so clear, more than 1,000 words could express. The boldness of love. This is another poem from which I bring you an excerpt, and its main theme is not to be ashamed of deeds and words. Inspired ones, not to be ashamed to speak of goodness. How relevant this is today, isn't it? If, in a group conversation, you criticize friends and foes, point out everyone's flaws, this is highly acceptable within the usual pattern of everyday casual talk. But if you start talking about virtues, about beneficial acts, people will quickly turn up their noses. Oh, what a strange conversation. Do you think you're better than someone else? What's this all about? Are you trying to act like a goody two-shoes? You see, we live in a time where evil is accepted and enjoys tremendous popularity. Vices are very popular and highly social, but virtues are not. You have to hide your values. Otherwise, they might hurt sensitivities, they might cause rejection. And this poem will speak deeply about this characteristic, which, it seems, is not so new after all. The soul that loves does not shrink before the world, nor does it hide the works done out of love for God, nor does it conceal them in shame, even if the whole world were to condemn them. That which is done with this spirit and this intention should not be hidden, even if it is subject to all the criticism in the world. There is only one justification for speaking of noble things: when we perceive people who thirst for them. This may benefit even a single human being. There is no reason to remain silent, even if the rest of humanity makes you the subject of ridicule. It may be that what one era laughs at is what another admires and ennobles. Here is another poem, Embrace of the Beloved, from which I have also brought a small excerpt. It speaks of freeing oneself from desires and illusions. And this liberation creates space for the sacred within us to manifest. Every small vice we overcome opens the way for other values, other hidden powers of human nature, other tools of the human condition to come to the surface. Remember what I so often say in my lectures: to draw closer to God is to draw closer to His attributes. It is not possible for me to like a human being if I do not like the way they walk, the way they speak, the way they dress, or where they live. Well, if I do not like any attribute of a being, then I do not like them. And if I love God, I love His attributes, and it is necessary to act, to create the ideal conditions for these attributes to emerge within me. Be perfect, as your Father in heaven is perfect. And when it seems that I smooth out an edge, according to John of the Cross, when I overcome a flaw, it opens space in my consciousness for yet another latent power, which is probably the counterpart of that darkness. The counterpart is always light, and it comes to the surface to occupy yet another space in my life. See how beautiful this excerpt is from the poem entitled Embrace of the Beloved. It is important to know that God dwells, hidden and silent, within the substance of every soul. There resides the Beloved most secretly, and His embrace is all the more comforting the pure and more solitary the soul is from all that is not God. The soul, pure and solitary from all that is not God, that which is not God is superfluous. This is very interesting because there is a dialogue by Plato called Ion, which speaks about poetry. He says that, no matter how much men possess all the technique in the world, know all the words in the world, never will a poet be able to match the inspiration of a divinely inspired madman. Of one who has received this divine inspiration. He does not work only from his repertoire, but works through inspiration. Never will an ordinary poet surpass the work of an inspired madman. In other words, this divine madness, this ability to capture voices that come from the realm of ideas, from the divine plane, however one prefers to call it. There are voices that are hidden and that reveal themselves when there is no space left within us for anything that is not God. Call it alive. This living flame speaks of a subject that is complex, yet beautiful, the question of glory. Glory is an attribute that can be attained by the soul, by human consciousness, which, in philosophy, are one and the same. The soul comes from anima, that which animates us, which is precisely where our consciousness resides. It speaks of this attribute of the soul, of being able to be in glory, even when the body is in a precarious situation, Even Joan of Arc, burning at the stake, is capable of having her consciousness and glory. This glory, which is above the conditions of physical comfort, is above the physical world. It is a profound feeling within a person of having found their place in the world, of having connected with that channel which belongs to them. And in this excerpt I selected from the poem called Viva, he speaks a little about this. Feel it, the soul, now within yourself. Not only as a fire that keeps it consumed and transformed into gentle love, but as a fire that burns deep within, producing a flame. And this flame, each time it blazes, immerses the soul in glory. Just as Teresa of Avila herself speaks of feeling her heart in flames. This divine flame that blazes and immerses the soul in glory. Because only it is capable of providing the sufficient light that the human soul needs to reach the greatest happiness conceivable, which is glory. It is the pinnacle of all feelings. Very, very beautiful and very profound. You have no idea, sister. A reflection on this, on glory, just on this attribute alone. Speaking of all the beings throughout history who have spoken of this and lived it, it would make for a very long lecture. There are many things condensed, so much condensed between the lines of someone who truly knows what they are saying. Whereas there is nothing, not even in the lines themselves, from those who merely repeat what has already been said. They simply embellish with more ornaments, but without any original thought, without any true idea, without adding value to the world. In a small passage from someone who knows what they are saying, there is often much more than in entire compendiums. This is very beautiful and very interesting. Perfect. Love will address precisely this matter, that God only desires our self-improvement. Nothing needs us, not even our works are needed. Many times, although our works may be beneficial, may add value to the world, He is capable of works. The only thing He cannot do is force our growth, because for that, free will exists. There must be merit. I have told you in other talks that nature has already created ships that fly. It has already created the speed of light. It does not need us to replicate that. What it cannot create is our full human condition, because this law of free will says that this depends on us. So, perfect love will address this topic a little. I bring you just a small excerpt. God desires nothing for Himself from all that we do or endure, for He needs nothing. And if He is served by anything, it is that the soul may be elevated. Now, there is no greater greatness for the soul than to be made equal to God. Notice once again, he takes a stance that, perhaps in our times, would still be seen as controversial. There is always this notion of the soul being constantly humbled, inferior, and this grand redemption of the soul. To merge with God, to realize that it is of the same nature, is still, even in our days, a strong and controversial subject. It is not that human work is useless. Teilhard de Chardin speaks a great deal about this. He says it is highly beneficial. But it only becomes truly beneficial when its purpose is free from personal, selfish interests, when its aim is transformative and luminous, when its purpose is to propel humanity forward, even if just a millimeter on this long ladder toward the sacred, toward God. And he expresses this very well. Understand that even today, his serene boldness would be unsettling, because we are so accustomed, and he will speak about this, to a different approach. In other poems, he addresses our attitude toward the divine, often as beggars rather than as active protagonists on this journey toward God. We remain passive and ask, expecting that everything will be done for us. In this sense, he adopts a very determined and powerful stance. He loved work, he loved action, and he lived an entire life of dedication and commitment. Therefore, he believed that one must walk toward God. Soul and Beloved is also a poem from which I brought a small excerpt. In this very brief piece, he says it is necessary to polish all our rough edges so that humanity may draw closer to God. In other words, you could say, by making a parallel with that line from an earlier poem, which says that everything within the soul must be God, and nothing should remain in the soul that is not God. You could also say that when you remove everything from a person that is not truly human, what remains is the divine. So, when you purify a single drop of water completely, it shares the same nature as the ocean. By purifying a person completely of that which is not human, all that remains is sacred. If you remove from a drop of water everything that is not H2O, what you have left is a nature that is akin to all the waters in the universe. The primordial waters, the pure waters of the ocean. When you remove from a person all that is not human, what remains is also worthy of standing before God. And it is a very interesting kind of morality. Anything that cannot be made sacred should not be lived. Which is very interesting. Any of your thoughts, feelings, and actions, would you do them before something or someone that, for you, holds a sacred meaning? No, you would not. Then, that is a sign that you should not be doing it anywhere. Life is entirely sanctified. Well, so let us continue. Soul and Beloved. So we can say that, in truth, this soul has found its God, because it is truly lost to everything that is not Him. See how beautiful this is, everyone. This soul has found its God, because it is definitively lost to everything that is not Him. In other words, it claims the right to have its God. It seizes this right through its own agency, through its capacity for self-purification. It is not passive in any way. It claims for itself the right to encounter its God. When it becomes lost to anything that is not divine, all its motivations, all its interests, it is not that it ceases to act in the world, but it begins to act in the world in the name of something much greater than its physical presence. Therefore, it adds, it brings value, it makes a difference. Another very interesting poem, Promessa, beautiful, in which he speaks about this capacity we have to be builders, to be factors of addition. Remember that I always mention that in Egypt it was said there have always been builders and destroyers of pyramids, and that we must choose to which group we belong. Promessa speaks a great deal about this issue, about being decidedly a force for construction and not for destruction. Let us not think that, through destruction, we will achieve anything grand. Construction and preservation of all that is healthy and valuable, all that is worthy of being made sacred. Let us then turn to Promessa. Your light will be born in the darkness, and your darkness will become like midday, and you will be like a well-watered garden, and like a spring whose waters never fail. And the deserts of many centuries will be watered by you. You will raise up the foundations of ancient generations, and you will be called the repairer of walls, the one who makes the path safe. That is, everything that is constructive, that moves humanity even a millimeter closer to the divine. You will be the builder of these things. You add value to the world. Yours is a luminous path, such that whoever follows it ascends the ladder and does not descend. Thus, to leave behind such a biography, according to John of the Cross, is the greatest legacy a human being can leave in the world. Those who follow it are illuminated, drawing closer to the light. Freedom speaks of something that, even within the Buddhist tradition, is often discussed, abandoning the thirst for sensory pleasures. To love is not to possess, to love is to enrich and to set free. Everything that passes through us should be enriched and liberated. This is very similar to something Khalil Gibran says, "We were placed here to enrich the gifts of the world." So let us turn to this brief passage on freedom. Why? As long as there is attachment to anything, no matter how small, the soul is prevented from progressing toward perfection. It matters little whether the bird is tied by a thick cord or a thin thread. As long as it is not set free, it remains just as captive by one as by the other. In other words, sometimes we believe we are free because the heavy chains of slavery are no longer present, or the heavy chains of the Inquisition, or the heavy chains of whatever it may be. The chain may be thin, it may be a constant silk cord. As long as it is endowed with strength, it could be a fine steel wire. It does not matter, we are bound just the same. No matter how much we adorn the chains, the only way to truly be free is to break them. Yet all we do is change and decorate the chains. But perhaps today we are as chained as we have ever been, and with a dangerous disadvantage. We love our chains and fear true freedom. The freedom to build oneself, the freedom to respect one's own identity, the freedom to chart one's own path, without being a product of one's environment, without being shaped, molded, and crushed in one's individuality by circumstances. We are almost prevented, we are driven to be lived rather than to live. Every man dies, but not every man truly lives. Some merely survive. We are almost forced into mere survival, directed by who knows whom and for who knows what purpose. This is still slavery. No matter how high-tech the chains may be today, it is still slavery. In the poem Most Beautiful Work, he speaks of that which is the most beautiful work, the construction of oneself. A person may reach marvelous conclusions in mathematics, in physics, may create the most beautiful poems, sculpt the most exquisite statues, compose the most enchanting melodies ever heard by human ears. If one does not build oneself, the fundamental part of their work remains undone, and their life is lost. Because it is not possible, without depth, to generate things of depth. One may create a beautiful play of appearances, which may seem lovely, but it will be as vulnerable as the consciousness of the person who created it. When you pause to ask what from our time will endure and withstand the test of time, through the centuries, seek out those individuals who possess depth. These are the only ones capable of projecting their work into a distant future. Those who are superficial possess very little psychological, moral, and spiritual strength to cast their fruits far from the tree that bore them, no matter how beautiful they may seem to their contemporaries. So let us proceed, for the most beautiful work awaits. Profound is the war and the struggle, for the peace the soul longs for must also be deep. The building will be all the more solid the stronger its foundation. In other words, war and struggle, even if they do not occur outside, are permanently taking place within us. This is, in fact, the essence of the Indian work, the Bhagavad Gita, the inner war. And this war must be won in grand style, with honor, with dignity, and the war is heavy. If there is not great merit, the foundations will not be worthy of a great construction. Because building the foundation of a multi-story building, I'm not sure if you've ever seen it, but it is a battle against the resistance of the earth. It is a battle to gain depth with soil that has been settled for centuries, soil that is neither accustomed nor willing to open a path within itself for steel foundations to penetrate. It is a battle to penetrate the earth. And only when you penetrate very deeply can you build very tall structures. It is a battle to penetrate into ourselves, and only when we penetrate can we leave behind works of great depth, works that truly endure through the centuries, always having something to say. Divine lamps. It is very interesting because it speaks about the human soul. This soul is associated with the idea of will. Will, according to the Hindu tradition, is the noblest quality that a human being possesses. It is the Atman. And this transformative will is capable of generating constant purification. We cannot become pure overnight. That is childishness. We can practice purification every day. We cannot be perfect, but we can dedicate ourselves to daily self-improvement. And human will is like that jackhammer we spoke of earlier, just a moment ago, which opens deep holes in the ground. So, let us share a short passage from Divine Lamps. Souls become like glass, which shines brilliantly when the sun reflects upon it. This is accomplished in the soul in a far more sublime way, through the intervention of the exercise of will. In other words, the soul shines resplendently, like glass upon which the sun reflects. The will is capable of bringing about this purification. Just as in Eastern traditions, there is talk of the diamond mind, the Vajra, the Dorj, which is transparent and crystalline, also as a work of the will. The human will, which is the most divine aspect within us, is capable of piercing through matter. Where there is will, there is a way, and achieving the greatest wonders. The path to eternal life. I also bring a small excerpt from this poem. It speaks of deeds that do not contribute to unity. Of all that we accomplish, that which brings us closer to the apex of the pyramid, to unity, is our ultimate destiny, as it is for the entire universe. The only thing in which a person can truly take delight is to be on the path to eternal life. Therefore, what benefit or value does anything that is not love for God have before him? In other words, everything that is not done with the goal of drawing closer to the divine and to unity may still be an effective means. But effective for what purpose? Do you realize that effective means, when a person has neither principles nor goals, can become dangerous? I always joke with my students that if you are heading toward an abyss, it is better to go on foot than by car, because you arrive more slowly, giving yourself time to reconsider. Therefore, if the means are highly sophisticated but the ends are precarious, the means become more harmful than fruitful. In other words, any work that is not illuminated by the purpose of seeking unity, of seeking the divine, may be effective, but not necessarily good. Effective for what purpose? Many things are effective, but the purpose is not always noble. Zeal of love. Zeal of love will address what we have already discussed. Is the person who stands before God a beggar or an offerer? Does he look and say, "What use is this to me?" And does he ask God to give it to him? Or does he look at the world and say, "How can I serve this?" And does he ask God to make use of him? This would be the dignified posture before the sacred. Seal of love. A short passage says the following. Ah, my God and Lord, how many souls are always seeking in you their comfort and pleasure, and asking you to grant them favors and gifts. However, those who seek to please you and offer you something at their own expense, setting aside their own interests, are very few. In other words, those who are offerings are rare. Those who are beggars are many. In other words, they reach out to God only to receive, never to surrender themselves, and never to give. Khalil Gibran said something very beautiful in The Prophet when he speaks about prayer and says, "It is useless to craft many prayers, because God does not hear your words unless He Himself speaks them through your voice." Listen closely to this. God does not hear your words unless He Himself speaks them through your voice. That is, instead of asking things from God, offer Him your voice, your word, your life. And then, yes, He hears your prayers, which are made by Himself, through your voice. And He Himself is you. It is a single identity. It is the closest way for us to come near to ourselves. The only true effectiveness is to draw nearer to unity, to the idea of the divine, of God. Seeking, my beloved ones, this is a small passage, too, which is almost like a song. It is so singable that one could make a beautiful song out of it. It speaks of how true love prevails over adversity. Seeking my beloved ones, I will through these mountains and riversides. I will not pick the flowers, nor will I fear the beasts. And I will go beyond the strongholds and borders. So delicate and beautiful, isn't it? And I will go beyond the strongholds and borders, without desires and without fears, without longing for the flowers and without fear of the beasts. I will cross all boundaries in search of my beloved ones. I find it very delicate and beautiful, with that pure quality of true poetry, of true poems that touch the heart, breaking through the shell of personality, opening a crack and reaching the heart of humanity. Well, Humility is a poem that speaks about growth amid crises. It tells us that a title is not the same as value. What truly has value is the ability of a person to find within themselves an answer, exposed to circumstances, let it be human, bringing one closer to the divine. The soul, in the dryness and emptiness of this night, gains spiritual humility. Through humility, made possible by self-knowledge, one purifies oneself of all imperfections, especially the pride into which one used to fall during times of prosperity. Now, seeing oneself as one truly is, so barren and miserable, not even as a first impulse does the thought occur, as it once did, of being more advanced than others or having an advantage over them, for now one recognizes that others are progressing better. In other words, we live in a time when diversity reveals to us that all our vanities are in vain. What is the value, then, for those who possess the uprightness of power, to be a light for others amid the darkness? Are we capable of this? No. Do we possess material powers? Look, a virus does not distinguish between the powerful, materially or otherwise. A virus recognizes no physical superiority. Now, those who, even amid adversity and the dark night, are able to bring light to others, these, surely, will be remembered. They are the ones who open paths through the darkest nights of the soul. Divine Fire speaks about how the divine nature is identical to the nature of the human soul. Both burn without being consumed. In this poem, it is shown that the only bearer of the divine flame, who is not consumed by it, on the contrary, who shines forth, is the human soul. Do you know why? Because they are of the same nature. They are part of one another. Oh, what a marvel, worthy of being told! Though the fire of God is so ardent and consuming that it could consume 1,000 worlds more easily than an earthly fire could. A piece of linen? And yet, it neither consumes nor destroys the soul in which it burns. Even less is it capable of causing any burden within it. Rather, to the extent of the strength of love, it divinizes and delights it, as it embraces and gently burns within it. The fire of the divine. Only the human soul is capable of bearing it without being destroyed. Quite the contrary. It is divinized and elevated without acquiring any weight. Quite the contrary. Ever greater lightness. This lightness that reverses gravity and draws it toward the channel from which it radiated. This small flame, a great divine flame, Unity. This passage from the poem entitled Unity is very interesting because it speaks about this idea of true love, which always revolves around the divine, because truth lies in unity. All separateness is illusion. The illusion of matter, the heresy of separateness as the Tibetans speak of it. I always tell my students that the reason a ceremony like marriage, and others, is not just a civil ceremony but traditionally a religious one, is because, since God is unity, what is united around God, man cannot separate. In other words, the ordinary is not capable of dividing it. The heart of man rises to God and, through him, unites with another human being. I am very fond of the correspondence between Khalil Gibran, the great poet, and Mary Elizabeth Haskell. There is a passage in which this woman, who was his lifelong correspondent, said to him, "My love for you is so great that it cannot fit in my heart. Therefore, I borrowed the heart of God to love you." And her perception is one of marvelous mysticism. So let us learn, let us get to know a little of this poem, Unity. Love is the inclination of the soul and its strength and power to reach God. For it is through love that the soul unites with God. And thus, the more degrees of love one possesses, the more deeply one penetrates into God and becomes centered in Him. In the same proportion as the degrees of divine love possessed by the soul, so are the centers it may have in God, each one deeper than the other. For love, the stronger it is, the more unifying it becomes. For the soul to be in its center, which is God, it needs only a single degree of love, for with this one degree, it unites with God through grace. In other words, when you possess a drop of a true, pure feeling, one of surrender, of identity, this attraction we have toward the source of our life, a single drop of this love already justifies a life. And from this first step of the ladder, this love begins to solidify, to become more established. Each new degree of love is a new step in consciousness, which makes us more worthy and more suitable vessels for an even higher love. If we consider what we commonly call love, the everyday I love you, perhaps it is still very far from even the first step. Perhaps it is still very far away, often rooted in fleeting passions, in personal interests to banish loneliness, to fill a void, in the desire to have a witness to our personal story. In other words, many times, though we may not be aware of it, it is merely the use of another for my own psychological comfort, for my physical comfort. And the use of another, as Immanuel Kant once said, is always profoundly immoral. A rational being must never be treated as a means, but always as an end in itself. Therefore, if we pause to examine our everyday, trivial loves, perhaps they do not even reach the first step of that true love which leads to unity. Cicero said something very beautiful about this. If you love and become nobler, more understanding and committed to the suffering of others, more attuned to the needs of life, then you truly love. But if you love and become more selfish, more isolated, and focused only on your own interests, then you do not love, nor does anyone who acts in this way truly love. Of course, I am expressing this in my own words, but that is the idea. True love overflows and tends to unify everything around us until it ultimately unites with God Himself. If our love does not bear these fruits, we must be careful. Perhaps it is nothing more than a fleeting passion, or a form of accommodation, or a feeling of dependency, or something else entirely, which can and should be properly qualified. We should ensure that in our lives, we reach at least a drop of true love, at least the first step. Conclusion. In concluding this whole story about this character, I hope I have left a bait for you. That is truly my intention every time I speak about a great author, to leave a bait that might inspire you to claim this inheritance, which is the greatness of the men of the past. Carl Jung used to say that when we learn from the past, we justify the existence of our ancestors, we breathe life into them. And indeed, this is a fundamental issue. We have a wonderful inheritance behind us, yet we continue to think that inheritance is only about receiving some money from a deceased relative. When, in fact, we possess values that are far greater, far more legitimate, and far more transformative than material ones. We have a great inheritance, and I hope this serves as a lure, a bait, for you to claim yet another part of this legacy. The dark night of the soul, get to know a bit about this work, about this mystic who is so pure, so profound, so devoted, and so genuine in his intentions. And as we have seen, sometimes we pause to compare various other traditions that speak of similar things. But, for example, we notice that at different points in time and space, when a person purifies themselves, flowers of the same kind bloom within them. When a person is pure, when they are a channel, when they embody surrender. And not theft, not taking, not selfishness. When one is surrender, when their inner name is surrender, they become fertile ground in which flowers are born, flowers that are all very similar, no matter the place or time. And I close with a phrase attributed to St. John of the Cross, which in itself speaks of the man who uttered it, of his profound understanding of human values, of justice, and of the necessary connection with the divine, so that these things may be real, so that they are not mere illusions, coerced and constrained by circumstances. He says the following: there is no longer a path here, because for the just there is no law. He is a law unto himself. In other words, the just person is the freest of all human beings. There is no law to constrain him to do what must be done, because he knows more than any law. He is a pure and true expression of the law. He is law in himself. This is the most free and most fulfilled of all people. I leave you with these reflections, which I hope will be useful to you. In such a way, we are always living, but at this moment, more than ever, both within and without, we are immersed in the dark night of the soul, and a luminous guidance is always helpful. Thank you all very much. A warm embrace.